France is a very old country, being a little over 1600 years old, so saying that you can expect that it has some tall tales and legends floating around the country, particularly stories hailing from the streets of Paris. Born James Douglas Morrison, he was a singer, songwriter and poet who served as the lead vocalist of the rock band The Doors. However, Morrison developed an alcohol dependency during the 60s, with him passing away unexpectedly at the age of 27 in Paris. As no autopsy was performed, the cause of his death remains unknown. He was ultimately laid to rest in the famous Père Lachaise cemetery. Over the years, his headstones were defaced or stolen until Morrison's own father placed a rather ordinary looking one on the site with an inscription in Greek, which reads, "Against his own demon." However, in 1997, journalist Brett Meisner was visiting the cemetery when he had this photo taken of him, standing in front of Jim Morrison's headstone. However, in the background of the picture, standing in the doorway of a crypt, you can clearly see a semi-transparent figure, arms held wide, which resembles the late singer. Many state that the pose is very reminiscent of a famous photo taken of Morrison. What do you guys think though? Ghost or trick of the light? Whatever you think, it's been enough to drive more tourists to the cemetery to attempt to catch a glimpse of the famous singer. In at number 4, we have Sweeney Todd. Now hear me out before we begin. Yes, I know that Sweeney Todd is said to hail from Victorian London, however this legend states that maybe he didn't, and maybe he walked the streets of France. First and foremost though, Sweeney Todd is a fictional character who appeared as the villain of the Victorian petty dreadful serial The String of Pearls. The tale became a staple of Victorian melodrama and London urban legend. A barber from Fleet Street, Sweeney Todd murders his customers with a straight razor and turns their bodies over to Mrs. Lovett, his partner in crime, who bakes their flesh into meat pies. However, could it be that the original Sweeney Todd was not from London but instead hailed from medieval Paris? Legend states that Paris had its very own demon barber during the 14th century, and was perhaps the first home to the cannibalistic pastries from the murderous barber. During this time, the Rue de Marmousets was known far and wide for its succulent French delicacies, especially for those made by a butcher next door to a barbershop on the corner. The pies and pastries were said to be so tasty that even King Charles VI was said to have been a fan. From 1384 to 1387, the butcher was said to have been in cahoots with his neighbouring barber, with it being said that the pastries were so scrumptious thanks to the young flesh of the victims of the demon barber. The partnership was said to have thrived for 3 years and would have continued if their gory deeds weren't discovered. It was said that an abandoned dog was what gave them away, who was barking outside the door of the barbers. The police conducted a search and discovered heaps of human bones and flesh in the shared underbelly of the two shops. For their crimes, the barber and the butcher were burned alive, along with their shops, in order to exorcise the area from their evil. Coming in at number 3, the Catacombs. The Catacombs of Paris are underground ossuaries which hold the remains of more than 6 million people in a small part of a tunnel network built to consolidate Paris' ancient stone quarries. Now, it was largely forgotten until it became a novelty place for concerts and various other private events in the early 19th century, as well as a hotspot for urban explorers. Now, as you would expect, there are a ton of legends surrounding this creepy burial site, so I'll be listing off a handful. Let's start with the ghost of Philbert Espard. During the French Revolution, Philbert was a doorman at the Val de Grace Hotel. During a mission to fetch a liqueur from a cellar, Philbert wound up in the Paris catacombs instead, walking around in the darkness alone with just a single candle. He became lost and confused. His body was not found until 11 years later when a group of cataphiles uncovered it. His body is now buried in the catacombs in the exact spot that he was found. Legend now states that on each November 3rd, Philbert's ghost haunts the labyrinth of the catacombs. However, the most disturbing story hails from the 1990s when a group of cataphiles were walking through the catacombs and discovered a video camera on the ground. To their surprise, the camera held footage on it. While watching the footage, it became apparent that the man filming was lost and had no idea how to escape the winding tunnels. The video then ends abruptly with the man dropping the camera on the ground and running off into the unknown. He was never discovered. However, it was this legend that many believe As Above, So Below, the movie, was based off of. Coming in at number 2, we have The Phantom of the Opera. We're all familiar with the 1986 musical based on the book by Gaston Leroux, with music by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Its central plot revolves around a beautiful soprano, Christine Daae, who becomes the obsession of a mysterious, disfigured musical genius living in the subterranean labyrinth beneath the Paris Opera House. But did you know this story is actually based on legend, with many Parisians being all too familiar with the story of the Phantom and the mysterious box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House. This legend legend began at the Music Conservatory on Rue Les Pelletiers, where it is said that a young pianist and a young ballerina fell in love. Planning to be wed, the pianist composed a piece of music to symbolize their love that was intended to be played at their wedding. However, that never happened because on October 28, 1873, a fire destroyed the conservatory and killed many, including the ballerina. The pianist survived but was forever scarred by the fires, particularly on his face. He abandoned the world and took refuge in the underground passage of the Garnier Opera House in order to escape the dreadful people who considered him a monster or a demon. He stayed there for the rest of his life, devoting himself to his music. Now, the pianist was never disturbed, but rumors quickly began to spiral, creating the legend of the Phantom of the Opera. The first rumors came from the opera house staff, such as stagehands and dancers. It is also purported that box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House is said to be haunted by the mysterious phantom and should always be left vacant for him. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Notre-Dame and the Devil's Door. Notre-Dame is one of the most infamous places in French history, with it being a medieval Catholic cathedral that was consecrated to the Virgin Mary and is considered to be one of the finest examples of French Gothic architecture. However, popular interest in the cathedral blossomed after the publication of Victor Hugo's novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, back in 1831. The cathedral is holy ground, but saying that how many tourists from around the world have been ushered in by Satan himself. Some history first though. When it comes to the construction of buildings such as this one, construction always starts at the back of the building, with the entrances added last. So when it came time to add the famous door to the cathedral, a man by the name of Mr. Biscornet, a young metalsmith, convinced the church to hire him. The job lasted months, with Biscornet slaving away in his workshop. However, when he finally finished, it was of course a masterpiece and blew the minds of Parisians. However, were the doors perhaps too good to be true? This all took place during the 1300s, when magic was believed and myths spread fast. So when people saw the door for the first time, they believed that Biscornet couldn't possibly have crafted it himself, and that instead he had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for the masterpiece. Stories quickly began to emerge of people claiming to have visited Biscornet during the creation and found him unconscious on the floor, with the project mysteriously completed. The rumors began to spread, with priests adding fuel to the fire by claiming that the door's locks refused to work until they were sprinkled with holy water. To top things off, not long after this, the artist died, with many speculating that in order to fulfill the contract, the devil had to claim Biscornet's soul.
Kicking off at number 5, Théâtre de la Ville. Not gonna lie, this one is equal parts morosely charming and also completely terrifying. The Théâtre de la Ville, meaning the City Theatre, was opened on the 30th of October and has a rich history of misfortune and tragedy. Until the fall of Napoleon III in 1870, it was known as the Imperial Theatre and showcased the dignitary of Paris in all their theatrical glory. One of the more tragic tales surrounding the theatre is the story of the French romantic poet and public eccentric Gérard de Nerval, who is best known for his sordid travel diaries and his strange habit of roaming the streets of Paris with his pet lobster in hand. Tragically, Nerval committed a grisly suicide in a particular shady corner of a nearby narrow street, and in death it is said that his spectre haunts the theatre. Spectators claim to have seen his form pop up on stage in a ghostly ploy to distract the actors. Apparently he's lost his lobster though. Next up at number 4, Parc Monceau. Parc Monceau is a picturesque picnic park in the heart of Paris, an otherwise perfect landscape for tourists and locals alike to enjoy on a hot summer's day. Opened in 1863, Parc Monceau is one of the largest green spaces in Paris, comprised of 4 others which were created by Napoleon III and his prefect of the Seine, Baron Haussmann. They were made to be enjoyed by the ever-growing Parisian population and still are to this very day. Strange then that the grim history of a nearby paranormal hotspot is regularly avoided, blending both historical fact and local legend. The name of the park's only tomb, the Rue de la Tombe Issoire, which hints at its most notorious legend, that is Abbaye de Mortemer, a brigand who terrorised Paris during the 9th century, looting and pillaging passing travellers of the green area. Eventually he was caught and his head was lopped clean off by William of Aquitaine, but it didn't stop his spirit from continuing his terrifying regime, being one of the most notorious spirits to have been sighted in modern day Paris, often appearing at the park's Palais du Bardo. It may sound like hocus pocus, but still, stranger still, in 1911 the Palais was controversially sold to the government, but mysteriously it burnt down before any work could commence on it. The work of Monceau? Well, probably. Coming in at number 3, The Man in the Black coat. And I just absolutely love this creepy tale because it reminds me of one of my favourite films of all time, Midnight in Paris. It's not scary in the slightest, but check it out if you haven't. Great film. Anyway, as the legend goes, on one particular warm evening in 1925, a man named Jean Romier was sat reading in the grounds of the Jardin du Luxembourg when a handsome man in a black coat approached him and after conversation invited him to a private concert at his nearby home. Romier followed the man to his apartment on the Rue de Vaugirard, where he was treated to a delightful evening of classical music and poetry. After enjoying his night, Romier left, and on his way home he went to light a cigarette, but realised that he'd left his lighter back at the apartment. He ran back upstairs to the third floor and knocked on the door, but to no response. He knocked and knocked when a nearby neighbour came out of their apartment, annoyed at all the banging, and told Romier that no one lived there. It had been abandoned for at least 20 years, after the previous tenant, a talented musician, had tragically passed away. Since then, any local Parisian will tell you that if you linger late enough in the Jardin du Luxembourg, eventually a man in a black coat will invite you to his apartment for a private concert. Would you go? Me? Nah, I'm alright. Swinging in at number 2, we have the Jardin des Tuileries, which, while having a beautiful sounding name, is actually the scene of an incredibly bloody past and dark history. In the 16th century, the feared and nefarious Queen of France, Catherine de Medici, had many enemies, conspirators who'd like nothing more than to bludgeon her in her sleep and remove her from the throne. Because of this, she employed the brute strength and bloody tactics of her henchman, Jean the Skinner, who rounded up her enemies and set about on a campaign to murder them all. He did exactly that, and he was very effective at it. So effective that Queen Catherine herself started to grow paranoid of him, because he knew so many of her secrets and political intrigues. Well, of course, she decided the only course of action was to execute Jean the Skinner outside her palace at Tuileries. Since then, the Red Man, also known as the Red Spectre, has been known to haunt the gardens in his blood-red attire. Marie Antoinette is said to have seen him just before losing her head, and it's commonly known that Napoleon consulted him during his rise as emperor to predict the outcome of forthcoming battles. That's pretty useful. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Les Catacombs. Because after all, it can be no other. There's no denying that the creepiest, eeriest, most paranormal place in Paris is the endless catacomb caverns that wind their way through the streets below. The catacombs of Paris are a myriad of underground ossuaries that allegedly hold the remains of more than 6 million people, which were created in an effort to eliminate the city's overflowing cemeteries. Whether you believe the tales that surround this haunted place or not, there's no denying that the Paris catacombs are an undeniable effigy to the dead and long lost souls of the City of Lights. Although there have been terrifying tales of entire tour groups going missing, people driven to insanity after being lost in the long dark of its winding tunnels, it's much simpler to see the real haunting that the catacombs possess, because the ghosts are in the very bones themselves, in the million memories that they represent, entire walls and tunnels built by the skeletal bones of the city's residents that have passed in and out of memory through a long, vibrant, rich, and oftentimes bloody history. Paris has seen a lot in her time, and the tunnels, well, they'll keep on going.
Number 5 on this list is Abbaye de Mortemer. This abbey is located in the French town of Mortemer in the Normandy region and has a deep history to it. In the mid-1500s, this was a prosperous area filled with a bunch of monks. It was a growing town that was one of the most successful in the region. This didn't last too long though. When the 1700s struck, things changed quickly. The men who were funding this town grew greedy and cared little for the people that were living there. The abbey itself started to deteriorate and the monks began moving out. Soon it was a shell of its former self and only had 4 monks that it housed. This wasn't the end though, because in 1789 this abbey saw the worst horror of its history. The French Revolution was at its height and sweeping its way through France. Religion was completely out of favor, and that meant the 4 monks that were living there were also out of favor. When the revolutionaries got to this location and found these monks, they didn't hold back. They took them into the cellar of this abbey and brutally massacred all 4 of them with no provocation. People think that this was one of the main incidents that caused this place to become one with the spirits. Since then, many ghostly sightings have been reported at this spot. One of the most famous stories was in World War II. A British paratrooper landed in the forest nearby and was spotted by the Germans. he thought he was doomed for until a monk appeared out of nowhere and guided him to safety. It's believed that this is one of the spirits of the dead monks still trying to help those in desperate need. One of the most famous ghostly legends is the woman in white who wanders the grounds. This ethereal being floats through the area and was even photographed once before. Her origin is currently unknown, but it seems that after the monks were killed, this area became home to not only their spirits, but many. Werewolves, goblin cats, and other demonic things have also been spotted here. This place is deeply haunted, and even though that one paratrooper was saved by a ghost, I think that's the exception rather than the rule, and for that reason, I still wouldn't recommend going here. Number 4 on this list is the Chateau de Brissac. This chateau in France is located in the Loire River Valley south of the village of Angers in France. It's a very beautiful chateau and extremely unique because it's actually a mix of 2 different chateaus. In the early 11th century, an initial castle was built on the land, but then several hundred years later, in the 15th century, the land was taken over by the Duke of Brissac, who had his own vision for the space. He tore down most of the castle except for the twin medieval towers and then built around those, so you get this very interesting style of chateau. This chateau is also apparently the tallest in all of France. The great beauty of this castle and unique architecture aren't the only things that distinguish it though, because it's also one of the most haunted. An expert on the castle named Wesley McDermott gives great insight into the entity haunting this building, where he says, "A double murder that occurred sometime in the 15th century within the walls of the castle has resulted in one of the more popular ghosts of the Chateau de Brissac, that of the La Dame Verte, or Green Lady. The current residents, the Duke of Brissac and his family, have become accustomed to her roaming the rooms, but she has scared many a guest. She's often seen in the tower room of the chapelle wearing her green dress. What's most terrifying, however, is her face. If she looks at you, you'll see that her face has gaping holes where her eyes and her nose should be, resembling a corpse. As well as her sighting, her moans are often heard throughout the castle in the early hours." After researching this, I found that Wesley was correct, and there is no end to the stories and encounters people have had with this green lady. I honestly do recommend going to this castle to look at its beautiful exterior. Going inside, though, is something that I wouldn't do. Number 3 on this list is Grès-les-Bains. This is a commune that is in the southeastern part of France. The reason why this town is so haunted is because of all the conflicts that have taken place there over the years. If you name any significant war that has happened within France, it's most likely that at some point or another, a battle was fought at this place. This has caused a lot of untimely death of soldiers and also the civilians who were living there. All of this death has left some spirits behind and made it so that this town is deeply haunted. Even though this is a town, the area that is most haunted seems to be located close to the castle at the top of this town. The reason that I say at the top is because this is a mountaintop village, and the way that this town is laid out has the castle right at the zenith. Therefore, everything is cascading down from this haunted castle that towers over the rest of the residents. There isn't one ghost who lays a rule to this town, but a collection of ghostly spirits. It's said that if you walk around the castle at nighttime, then many voices will start to speak out of thin air. Shadows will dance on the walls as if someone is around you, but once again there'll be nothing. People also report having a deep sense of uneasiness when they're in this area and feel unwanted. The ghosts here don't sound as dangerous as some of the other ones, but I still don't recommend checking this place out. Number 2 on this list is Chateau de Blandy-les-Tours. This is a castle that is located directly in the village of Blandy-les-Tours. This castle certainly isn't the most ornate in nature. It looks to prioritize functionality over beauty. This was largely because its main use was during the 100 Years' War, and the French wanted to make sure it wouldn't get captured by the British. This castle is very unique with its haunting. It's always haunted by one specific ghost, which I'm going to get into, but on one particular day of the year, this place goes off the rails with paranormal activity, and it's this event that has given the castle the title as the most haunted castle in all of France. At midnight on All Saints' Day, which is on November the 1st, it's said that a plethora of phantoms will fly out and circle around the tower of this castle. They will scream and wail and cause a major ruckus. People have also said that these wailings feel inherently sinister in nature, almost as if these ghosts are driving people away from this place. Reports have also said that chains can be heard smashing against the walls, and screams from below in the tower are heard as if people are locked up there. This event only takes place on November 1st at midnight though, and is now part of the lore and culture around this village. On a regular day, this castle isn't completely without ghostly apparitions though. The ghost of the master of the castle from the 11th century walks throughout in a bloodied outfit. It's said that he was murdered with a dagger and that his spirit walks around to this day still holding that same dagger which killed him. Number 1 on this list is Chateau de Bonaguil. This castle is located in the Saint-Front-sur-la-Masse and was built in the medieval ages. It's decently well kept considering how old it is today. As with most castles that were built around that time, this one played a critical role in the 100 Years' War. It's said that it was fought over multiple times and retaken by both sides multiple times as well. Aside from its deep history, reports of a potential haunting have run rampant all throughout France. In fact, people were so convinced that a spiritual presence was living here that a team went to go investigate it. This group of paranormal experts went in and made some startling discoveries. They said that when they got there, the thing that they noticed and detected the most was the sensation of somebody touching their shoulder, as if somebody was right behind you and had their hand just on one of your shoulders. This went hand in hand with a sensation of burning. Apparently the burning didn't have them in pure agony, but they were all reportedly uncomfortable for sure. The temperature changes didn't stop there either, because it also got incredibly cold all of a sudden. Creepy noises, loud shouts, and a very guttural and deep moan that echoed throughout the castle were all things that this group had reported as well. Nobody knows who or what ghostly spirit is causing these occurrences, but it's clear that something isn't quite right about this French chateau. Number 5 on this list is the Chateau de Kamar. The Chateau de Kamar is located in Périgord, an ancient region of France. The chateau isn't as beautiful as it once was, some of its former glory lost to time and also to war. This chateau was a critical point of interest in the 100 Years' War between France and Britain. It was the host to one of the more brutal fights that the war ever saw and was eventually captured by the British. As was typical back then, when you captured a place, many of the people that were running that place were either captured or put to death. One person of interest was put to death by being beheaded, and that was the young lover of the daughter of the Earl of Kamar. It's said that this man was deeply in love with the daughter and that she was in love with him as well. His beheading didn't seem like a major point of interest to the British at the time, but it actually left a bit of a spirit behind. What's really interesting about this story though is that it wasn't the spirit of this young man that was left behind, it also wasn't the spirit of the young daughter or even the Earl of Camargue himself. In fact, it was the spirit of this young man's horse. The horse that this young man rode into battle with to attempt to defend the chateau, and the horse that he had his whole life. Its ghost has yet to pass on. It's said that the ghost of this horse wanders the grounds of the chateau searching for its master. People who have ventured into the castle have reported hearing the clicking of hooves and a deep groan from a horse. People have also reported seeing this dead horse's ghost walking around the grounds of the chateau as if it was defending it from potential invaders like it did in the past. It's suggested that if you do intend to visit this chateau, that you don't bring any negative energy with you. The horse could potentially interpret this as a threat and come after you. Some have even suggested bringing a carrot or an apple and leaving it at the front of the chateau as a sign of good faith towards this ghostly steed. Number 4 on this list is the Palace des Tuileries. The Palace des Tuileries is home to one of France's most known ghosts who has been nicknamed the Red Man. The Red Man has been around for several hundred years and has 2 potential stories of origin. The first story talks about a man nicknamed Jack the Skinner worked for Catherine de Medici after her husband Henry II died. He worked as a hitman for her and would be sent to murder potential political foes. He was exceptional at his work, but eventually there grew a time where the Queen was worried that he knew too much about her. After all, he knew exactly how many people she had had executed considering he had done the executing. To make sure her secrets were safe, she had another man murder him. He killed him in the garden, which I should note is typically the area linked to this haunting, and then he left his body in said garden. When he came back to fetch the corpse, it was missing. Then, the Queen's astrologist told her that he foretold some great disaster happening to the people of Tuileries and that John would be at the forefront of it. Since then, whenever the Red Man appears, it's said that a tragic event will happen to the people surrounding his appearance. The second origin story is that when this palace was built, the Red Man was already there. This ghost spoke to Catherine de' Medici and foretold her death, and even though she forsook him and the palace that she had built, the prediction he had made turned out to eventually be true. Pierre-Jean de Béranger, a famous French poet, describes the Red Man as being a small man clothed from top to toe in scarlet, whose eye is so piercing and unearthly that it terrifies the most courageous. He never speaks, nor are his visits of much length. He vanishes soon after his presence is discovered. This has been echoed throughout time, as many French nobles have received visits from the Red Man before. Henry IV, Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette have all had visits from him in the past. There's even a story talking about how the Red Man appeared in front of Napoleon right before his death. There are tons of beautiful palaces in France, and if it was me, I'd avoid this one and go to one of them. Better to be safe than sorry when we're dealing with a devil-like demon whose presence means impending doom. Number 3 on this list is the Rue de Chantres. This is considered by most to be the most haunted streets in France. It's located in Paris on the island and is right next to the Notre-Dame Cathedral. This street is said to be haunted by the ghosts of many children. As with most ghost stories, this didn't come out of thin air, but from a horrible tragedy that took place on this street just over 100 years ago. In the early 1900s, there was a hotel that was located on this street. This hotel didn't really act as a hotel though, because during that time there was a massive outbreak of tuberculosis. The children in the area who had come down with the disease were sent to this hotel to quarantine. They were locked in the bedrooms of this hotel and couldn't leave at any point for risk of infecting other people. Some children died during these quarantines, which is already bad, but the main tragedy happened roughly a decade later in 1910. In 1910, there was a great flood of Paris where the River Seine overflowed and flooded the city. All the children that were currently locked inside their bedrooms at this time drowned during that flood. Nobody knows for sure the exact number of children who died in this tragedy, but it was certainly enough to make a spiritual imprint on the street. Now their souls go without rest and live along this street. People have heard the laughter and also the crying of children. They have heard the muffled screams as if they're screaming through water. They've also seen these children before, peering out at them from around corners, looking extremely sad and lonely. The spot acts as an attraction for supernatural hunters, but a landmark that I wouldn't recommend visiting. Number 2 on this list is Mont Saint-Michel. Mont Saint-Michel is one of the most beautiful and unique castles on the entire planet, in my opinion. How it's constructed and where it's located, it almost doesn't even seem like something out of real life. This castle is located off of the Normandy coast, and the only connection that it has to France is a road that goes underwater when it's high tide. How this place got made has a bit of a supernatural story to it. Apparently, the archangel Michael appeared to Saint Aubert in a dream and told him to start building here. When he resisted, Michael burned a hole right in his head. After this incident, the castle began its construction, and it took quite a while to become the beauty that we have today. It was a work in progress, with more things being added over the years. Now, because of this castle's location directly in the water, it is extremely hard to attack and was never captured during the 100 Years' War. During said war, one of the major commanders of this castle was Louis d'Estourville. His ghost is one of the most common sightings at this place. He apparently is responsible for the killing of thousands of English soldiers and had battles that were so deadly the water around them would turn red with blood. He's said to patrol the castle and act as a watchman of sorts for intruders and people posing a threat. Similar to our previous entry of the horse, one of his main objectives is to keep the castle safe. He isn't the only ghost at this spot though. The ghosts of monks can also be seen praying and meditating at this location. For a long time, this castle housed several hundred monks until they were ultimately kicked out from the space. Their spirits still linger in this place though, although they aren't nearly as frightening as the weathered war general, in my opinion. Number 1 on this list is the Paris Catacombs. The Paris Catacombs is unlike anything else on the entire planet and is the breeding ground for scary stories. These catacombs are a collection of tunnels that are underneath the city of Paris and stretch for over 2,000 acres. The tunnels act as an underground cemetery where they house over 6 million dead bodies. This is one of the largest collections of the dead in the entire world, and if that wasn't enough, you can actually see their skulls as they all line the walls. These catacombs are extremely difficult to navigate. Seeing as there are over 2,000 acres of them and it's underground, people have reported getting extremely lost when they're trying to explore them. This is part of the reason why only a portion of them are open to the public today. But all of this has led to a plethora of ghost stories and legends over the years. For instance, in 2004, a group of police officers were investigating an area of the catacombs that was closed to the public, and they came upon something unexpected. A bar, a living room, a workshop, and a meeting area for over 20 people, they were all found. This was alongside a PA system, a camera system recording the area, and a pirated means of electricity. All of this was more than suspicious, but when the officers returned a few days later with some more people, everything was gone, except for a note that read, "Don't search." This isn't all there is to the catacombs though. In the 1990s, a group was searching through them and found a video camera lying on the ground. They picked it up and examined it and saw that there was a recording. The recording was clearly of a man who was very lost in the catacombs and extremely frantic. Scary voices could be heard in the background, and the heavy breathing of this man indicated his panic. Finally, the camera fell to the ground and we could hear the man scream. These are just two of the more famous stories to come from these catacombs, but so many other ones of ghosts or demons haunting the area have come from this place. If you were to ever go here, then make sure you have a strong sense of direction and a flashlight, because the last thing you would want is to get lost in an underground haunted graveyard.